There's something undeniably tranquil about the first Uncharted game. It is a game that flawlessly captures the essence of adventure, not just through its engaging action, but through the journey itself, where growth, struggle, and discovery define the better parts of the experience. Despite its age, Drake's Fortune excels at immersing players in a world that feels both cinematic and personal, striking a firm balance between guided linear storytelling and organic exploration. And it does it in a way that very few other titles have ever achieved, despite the countless attempts. Every location in the game radiates atmosphere, from the dense, overgrown jungles teeming with hidden ruins, to the dark, ominous caverns that hint at long-forgotten secrets. The contrast between these spaces, the lush vibrancy of nature and the eerie desolation of the past, it kind of creates a world that feels alive, but not the kind of alive you would call an open-world game that is rich with NPCs. It instead gives the impression that a branching offshoot of life has somehow managed to remain untouched for centuries, yet they're still waiting to be unearthed. Ancient Spanish fortresses stand as silent witnesses to history, with their weathered stone and moss-covered walls bearing the weight of time, slowly succumbing to nature's embrace. And most of it happens right in front of you. Meanwhile, some of the most breathtaking sunsets and coastline horizons ever rendered on the PS3 can be witnessed at the same time, further reinforcing the game's ability to make even the simplest of landscapes feel somewhat grand and inviting. Drake's Fortune is more than just a beautiful world, though. It's an adventure crafted with a keen understanding of pacing and engagement. The gameplay is a carefully balanced mixture of cover-based shooting, fluid platforming, and light puzzle solving, aiming to ensure that every moment remains just as dynamic as the last. Combat, while not without its rough edges, encourages movement and strategy, requiring players to weave between cover, flank enemies, and at the very least stay on the move semi-regularly. The traversal mechanics are equally as notable, making every climb, ledge grab, or daring leap across a collapsing structure feel effortless and look cinematic. Every inch of this game is designed to keep the player moving forward, never letting the momentum falter, which is normally the case for most linear, story-heavy games that came out in this era. But what truly sets Drake's Fortune apart from the rest of the crowd is its heart. The witty, natural dialogue, the subtle and detailed character animations, and the effortless chemistry between the three main protagonists, Nathan Drake, Elena Fisher, and Victor Sullivan, make them feel less like scripted characters and more like real people that were casted to play in a generic action movie. One that you'd probably see late one night on a random channel that you don't remember because you were too stoned. Their banter, filled with the perfect mixture of warmth and humor, adds a layer of authenticity to the game that many games struggle to achieve to this day. Then you pair that with Naughty Dog's signature cinematic presentation, and it expertly weaves everything from the gameplay to the storytelling together in tandem, making every gunfight, every quiet conversation, and every adrenaline-fueled escape feel like the essential parts of one grand, sweeping narrative. The game never treats its story as a separate entity from its gameplay. Rather, it seamlessly integrates the two, ensuring that players are not just watching an adventure unfold, but they're actively participating in it, which is one of the things I always cherished about these games. This is a simple yet effective method of writing to avoid running into disconnect between the two of gameplay and the narrative, and most of the time it's a hard line for developers to cross, but Uncharted nailed it. I can confidently say that. With that being said, though, there are still some areas of Drake's Fortune that feel flawed. The gunplay, while serviceable, lacks the polish and refinement that later installments of the franchise would bring, and the combat encounters themselves can feel occasionally repetitive from time to time. The boating sequences in particular feel clunky and poorly thought out, breaking the otherwise smooth pacing of the overall experience. But, truth be told, these shortcomings do little to diminish the undeniable magic that Drake's Fortune delivers. For all of its imperfections, it remains as a game that understands what it takes to make adventure storytelling so compelling. It's not just about the action, the treasure, or the danger. It's about the thrill of the unknown, the wonder of discovery, and the relationships that form or are affected along the way. Even today, It stands as a shining example of how storytelling, gameplay, and world building can come together to create something truly unforgettable. The game begins with the camera circling the bottom of the ocean while a Sir Francis Drake quote from 1587 is being displayed on screen. There must be a beginning of any great matter, but the continuing until the end, until it be thoroughly finished, yields the true glory. There's a reason this quote is the first thing players are forced to see, and it's not for the reason you're probably thinking of. It's very common for an Uncharted game to start with a quote that is somehow meaningful to Nate's journey in one way or another, and it normally ties into or references how that specific story of that game will play out, but the one chosen for the first game is just as significant for Naughty Dog as it is for Nathan Drake. You see, back in the early 2000s, before the release of Uncharted, Naughty Dog was still a fairly small development studio in the grand scheme of things, with most people only really knowing about them because of the Crash Bandicoot or the Jak and Daxter series. Meaning, most people just took them at face value and thought they were just some studio that was good at producing these cartoonish, kid-friendly, and charming action-adventure kinds of games. But, to everyone's surprise, Naughty Dog had been wanting to branch away from these kinds of tropes and explore new territory for a long time now. I guess you could only really make so many Jak and Daxter games before it really starts to weigh on you. And thanks to the upcoming release of the PlayStation 3, they were finally given an opportunity to create something bigger and better than anything they've ever worked on previously. The only thing Naughty Dog had to do now was cast suitable talents to fit these lovable characters and craft the game. The only problem at the time was the fact that the actual studio part of Naughty Dog was still moderately small itself. Hell, Richard Lamarchant, former lead game designer at Naughty Dog, was even quoted on saying this, quote, "If you count co-president Evan Wells and fellow game designer Amy Hennig, I think there were a total of 6 of us altogether that worked on Uncharted Drake's Fortune." End quote. Now, that is a powerful statement to just throw out there in a one-off interview, and it's only so powerful based on how hard every member of that neatly knitted team worked. Every texture of this game was painstakingly hand-painted by each soul on the art team. Everything from the bright, colorful parts of the jungle filled with beautiful waterfalls in the background, all the way to the dark, gritty, and damp sections that remind you that you are, in fact, exploring the remnants of an actual uncharted part of the Amazonian rainforest. Naughty Dog knew that taking on this game was going to be difficult territory to conquer for them, and honestly it still kind of amazes me how they took this huge opportunity and ran with it like nobody's business. For Naughty Dog, one thing was for certain when they set out on this development adventure. They knew they wanted to make a narrative-based, action-packed, thriller kind of game. Something akin to the Indiana Jones movies, but with the player at home in the driver's seat instead of Harrison Ford. They also had a rough idea of the location they wanted. There were apparently talks about a few different places, but eventually they ended up settling on an unmapped island. So now all they needed to do was craft that lovable story. Perhaps one where the hero triumphs over evil, saves the day, and gets the girl. And if you can do all that in under 2 hours and 30 minutes of runtime, well, let's call it a day, boys. All jokes aside though, when Naughty Dog set out to craft the story for Uncharted, they actually struggled quite a bit because their main driving philosophy of writing for this game was picking a random part of history that everybody already knew a little bit about, and then filling in the blanks, so to speak, by using the game's story to ask a question that nobody ever really asked in real life. In the first game's case, the question is, what if Sir Francis Drake had children? Of course, everyone with a 4th grade education or higher knows the great explorer Sir Francis Drake never really had any kind of offspring, but Uncharted wants you to use your imagination and embrace the fictional scenario here for a second. So that way, it's a little easier to enjoy the story a little more, and it's a little freer to digest. It's obvious a lot of care and dedication went into the narrative itself, but you also have to remember that this was their first attempt at telling a story and making a game like this in general. So there are bound to be some holes in the plot here and there somewhere along the line, but thankfully none of them are so big that they can't be glanced over. And to make things even better, the sequels explore all of these unanswered areas or gray areas of the narrative to further tie things together in great detail. The developers actually sat down and watched dozens of adventure movies and read through tons of pulp magazines from the 1930s and 40s in order to get a true feel for this genre. And since this game was going to try to resemble a movie anyway, Naughty Dog thought it would also be a good idea to cast voice actors with onstage experience to better suit the characters. But then they ran into another problem. That now meant that the characters they were going to be playing had to appeal to anyone and everyone. Josh Scher, a former narrative and cinematic director of Naughty Dog, had this to say when he was asked about the importance of characters in a Verge interview from 2015. Quote, "The thing that we wanted to focus on from the get-go were characters and story. That was something we felt that, particularly back in 2005 and 6 when this thing first started getting developed, was something that was sort of an afterthought in the majority of video games out there. So we really wanted to not only tell this pulpy, action-adventure style thing, but also try to develop some relatable, entertaining characters, and have the story be what pulled you through the game." End quote. And that's why the character of Nathan Drake ended up being modeled in an everyman kind of way. It was done in an effort to appeal to every player who dare picks up the controller and experiences the adventure. Naughty Dog knew that if they ever really wanted to sell anybody on this idea of a semi-realistic, cunning strategy adventure game, that everything about Nate had to be studied carefully, all the way down to his demeanor. And the same really goes for every character on the screen, but to far less of a degree. Naughty Dog supposedly tried really hard to steer away and avoid copying from superhero protagonists like Master Chief, Marcus Phoenix, and even Lara Croft to an extent, if you can believe that, by designing the character of Nathan Drake to be thrown into these situations that constantly have the cards stacked against him time and time again, thereby making his true identity come from things like quick thinking and resourcefulness. In a way, this does make Nathan Drake stick out to me more as a character a little differently than others do because of how he's always living on the sometimes literal edge of his abilities. And although at times he does seem to be a little invincible due to his absurd survival rate of these catastrophic events, this is actually the opposite of what Naughty Dog had intended or hoped to portray when they crafted the lovable explorer that is Nathan Drake. You, as the audience member, are supposed to be on the edge of your seat while Nate overcomes every surprising obstacle that throws itself into his path, oftentimes resulting in him only surviving due to some bizarre strand of luck that happened to intervene. And fun fact about luck in the Uncharted games, Naughty Dog even went as far as to try to explain a question that was going to be asked regardless of who plays the game. And that question was, hey, if this is supposed to be a realistic game, then why can Drake tank so many bullets before dying? Obviously, this question doesn't even need to be answered because it's a video game after all, but I thought the solution that Naughty Dog provided was so clever that I've wondered for years when I'll see another video game try to replicate it, or at the very least, world build similar. The solution I'm referring to is called the luck system. It's not a real system that's in the game or anything, of course. It's actually just the developers overanalyzing the health bar to a ludicrous degree. But the amount of detail and effort put into the explanation is what really makes it noteworthy. And it even vaguely falls into the series' lore somewhat accurately in the process. It states that when Drake is getting shot at, he isn't actually getting hit per se, he is essentially just really lucky. And those first few bullets are only grazing him or something to that manner. But if you continue to get grazed by said bullets, then Nate's luck will run out, resulting in the screen slowly fading to gray, and the last bullet in that sequence will usually end up hitting him and putting him under. Now, this is such an obviously stupid and over-the-top explanation to the question, but for someone to ask a question like this in the first place, it's kinda doing the same as trying to measure the length of a cloud. Since clouds are constantly changing shape due to things like temperature and atmospheric pressure, attempting to measure their length is futile in the long run of things. So, in that essence, I guess it's only fitting for Naughty Dog to double down and give such an equally redundant rebuttal. Another reason I think I like Nathan Drake so much is because his mocap and voice acting work was captured by the talented and charismatic Nolan North. Sometimes a voice actor for a character undersells or misunderstands the work they are given completely, resulting in a shitty experience for all parties involved. But that is not the case with Nolan North, however, and the same can be said for most of the things that he's ever worked on.
I have a 7-year-old little boy who asked me, Dad, what do you do? And I said, well, do you remember when your buddy came over the other day and you guys ran around the backyard and the clubhouse became a pirate ship and you were jumping off? And he said, yeah. I said, that's what I do.
The hell?
It seems like from the very beginning, Nolan was able to wrap his head around and embody the character and personality of Nathan Drake, and it resulted in him gifting us with arguably some of his best performances yet with the Uncharted games. Performances that increase in maturity at the equal pace of the franchise, I might add. Apparently, his chemistry with Emily Rose was something that stood out to everyone in the Naughty Dog studio almost immediately. So much so that Emily Rose was casted as Elena Fisher, when originally, she was only in the studio as a sort of background helper for line readings and stuff to that nature. Keep in mind, I have no idea how real this story actually is, but either way, I honestly can't say I could think of anyone else who could do a better job than her here, mainly due to how good her and Nolan North are at bouncing off casual conversation on each other. This opening scene with her and Nate does a great job of explaining what I'm talking about, and it sets up the plot nicely, so I'm going to let it speak for itself.
I am here off the coast of Panama, where we just recovered what we believe to be the coffin of legendary explorer Sir Francis Drake, who was buried at sea over 400 years ago. Are you sure you want to be defiling your ancestors' remains like that?
You make it sound so dirty. Besides, thought you didn't believe me.
Well, I did do my research, and apparently Francis Drake didn't have any children.
Well, history can't be wrong, you know. For example, you can't defile an empty coffin.
What the hell?
You devil.
What is it? Come on, hold it up.
No way. Deal was for a coffin. That's it.
Wait a minute. If my show hadn't have funded this expedition, you wouldn't have...
You got your story, lady.
Look, Mr. Drake, you signed a contract. I have a right to see every single thing that...
Could you hold that thought? Sully, we got some trouble. Hurry it up.
Okay. What's going on?
Pirates.
Pirates?
Yeah, the modern kind. They don't take prisoners. At least not male prisoners.
Wait, what are you talking about? Shouldn't we call the authorities or something?
Yeah, that'd be a great idea, but we don't exactly have a permit to be here.
What?
Yeah, so unless you want to end up in a Panamanian jail, we should probably handle this ourselves.
Well, what's worse?
You obviously haven't been in a Panamanian jail. Do you know how to use one of these?
Yeah, it's like a camera. You point and shoot, right?
Good girl. Here we go.
One thing that I noticed in this opening piece of dialogue is how Naughty Dog essentially addressed the biggest question everyone was asking themselves right out of the gate. Everyone knows that Sir Francis Drake never had any kind of offspring, but this is where Uncharted wants to branch away from reality in order to tell a historical fiction kind of story. One that isn't without its embellishments, of course, but not enough to where it wouldn't make it into one of those dime novels from back in the day. And to make it even better, the later entries of games even take the time to explore this concept in far greater detail. The first game is nowhere near as thorough, though. It was mainly designed with the idea of some pure run-of-the-mill fun in mind, which, if I had to bet, is probably the same reason why pirates attack you in the first chapter. Once the combat actually starts, though, this is where the adaptable animations mechanic can be noticed for the first time. What this means essentially is Drake's movement animations will change automatically depending on whether or not he is in combat or exploring. And what might be the most impressive and notable part about this system is that it's operating in the background 100% of the time while you play and activates as soon as the game starts, meaning there isn't a single second that goes by where this mechanic isn't actively scanning your environment while you're busy platforming or puzzle solving. Nathan Drake has 3 movement animations. The first is walking, and it is most of the time triggered by story mode events. The second is called Explorer Mode, and it's that light jog you see Nate doing whenever he walks around exploring or jumping from platform to platform. And the third and final is triggered when combat erupts. When Nate is in combat, his movements become far more frantic. His casual jog turns into a steady sprint, and he appears to be visibly more nervous at times, sometimes even talking to himself under his breath like when a grenade lands in close proximity. But then as soon as the combat sequence is over and he's done being shot at, he goes right back to that calm, collected, and relaxed demeanor of the Explorer mode. It might not seem like it at first, but when little things like this come together, it only helps make the game's atmosphere feel a whole lot more immersive and realistic. The pirate attack itself is basically just a glorified tutorial. Its main purpose is to teach you the core principles of the game, like taking cover, shooting guns, and the melee combat system. The pirates come at you 2 or 3 to 4 at a time in waves, and the primary goal is to just survive until Sully arrives. There's also this funny little sequence where a pirate will pull you under the water if you jump off the boat for some reason, and I thought it was goofy enough to add. Sooner or later, though, the boat that you're on catches fire due to the mobile mounted turret floating around, but just as things are getting too out of hand, Sully's plane flies overhead, and now Nate and Elena have to ditch the boat for real this time. But not before Elena grabs her camera. And this is where we get to meet our third main protagonist, Victor Sullivan, voiced by the wonderful and cunning Richard McGonigal. Sully is Nate's best friend / mentor, but that part of their relationship isn't really explored until the third game. He's also a seasoned treasure hunter with a wealth of experiences and a charming, roguish personality. Often equipped with a cigar in his mouth during most scenes, a signature habit that adds to his suave, laid-back demeanor. But despite how easygoing and often humorous his nature is, Sully is reliable in dangerous situations and deeply loyal to Nate. Though sometimes he can't help but come across as a bit of a scoundrel, he obviously has some kind of deep care for Nate and his friends. One that is clearly evident and can be witnessed by anyone who lays eyes on their initial interaction on his plane. The next chapter starts right after Nate and Sully have ditched Elena, as the two embark out to find El Dorado, the lost city of gold, and according to that diary that belonged to Sir Francis Drake, it should be somewhere in the Amazonian jungle, but nothing's ever really that easy. After a little bit of snooping around, though, the duo discover that the ground is hollow in this certain area. So this calls for Nate to climb up and around these specific structures in order to knock down a rock big enough to smash through the floor. This is also where the game gives you the basics on the climbing system, and since Uncharted is a 3D puzzle platformer, you're going to be doing a lot of climbing as the game goes on. Once the rock is pushed through, though, the pair make their way into the new recently discovered entrance.
What a warm and homey place, huh?
Well, not quite what you were expecting, huh?
Yeah. Where's all the damn gold?
Yeah, this place was picked clean centuries ago.
No good limey pirate.
No, it wasn't Drake. Check this out. Looks like the Spanish got here before he did. What the hell, Sully?
Nate, I'm not looking for a lousy piece of tin. I'm up to my eyeballs in debt. I was really counting on this one.
Too many big bar tabs in Lima, I guess.
That and, well, just a few bad deals.
Yeah, well, I always told you to stay away from the bad guys. And the bad girls.
Yeah? Look who's talking.
What's that supposed to mean?
That reporter? I saw the way you were eyeing her.
Elena? Please. I snuffed any chance with her the second we ditched her on that dock.
All's fair in love and war, kid.
And what if you can't tell the difference?
Then, my friend, you are in big trouble.
This cutscene is an attempt to ground the characters in reality somewhat, and explain why they are doing the things they're doing instead of portraying them as these mindless, joyful Tomb Raiders with no real purpose. Instead, we get a whole clip where Sully mentions how he's up to his eyes in debt while visibly voicing his frustrations to Nate. I really like this attempt to explain how other characters feel and explain their ulterior motives instead of just writing them off as, well, these two are here because they really like history, I guess. It's an extra, skippable layer of depth that doesn't really need to be added but only enhances things because it was, just like the casual conversations everyone has on their way towards the objective. It helps make the characters' relationships feel more believable, and plus you could always learn some extra facts about them too. Like how when Sully nonchalantly tells Nate the story about the time he pulled one over on Pablo Escobar.
You know, this reminds me. I ever tell you about the time I pawned a phony 16th century Santa off on Pablo Escobar? Risky move, but by the time he figured it out, I was... Nate, are you even listening to me?
Hanging on every word.
When he's calmed down, though, it doesn't take much convincing for Sully to power through, and this is where the actual puzzle-solving aspect of Uncharted comes into play. Things start out fairly simple by making you shoot a few red barrels and lifting a door, but eventually the two run into an unlit brazier. This is when Nate remembers seeing something about it in Sir Francis Drake's journal, causing him to pull it out and double-check. The journal itself is going to be the key factor to helping you solve most, if not every puzzle this game has to offer. And this is basically the game trying to explain this to you without outright saying it in a text box in the top right corner or something like that. The more that I think about it, this whole area with the first brazier practically serves as a kind of intro tutorial for puzzles themselves, honestly. It doesn't explain what exactly to do per se like it did in the actual tutorial section, but it does give you 90% of the answers here by holding your hand and expects the player to at least figure out that they're supposed to shoot the lamp in order to progress through the level. I would also go out on a limb to say that Drake's journal that Nate carries in the Uncharted games was one of the keystones that led to characters like Arthur Morgan and Ellie from The Last of Us keeping journals on their characters as well. I don't necessarily have all the data there is out there to back that statement up or anything, but Uncharted is one of the first games I can remember where the main character having some kind of journal was a key point in the writing process. Going back to the game, though, the next area is where the first real puzzle appears that the player will have to solve completely by themselves. After continuing through some narrow hallways, Nate and Sully eventually stumble into a room full of pillars and statues. This is where Nate recognizes the symbols on the walls and takes another look at his ancestor's journal. This puzzle is ridiculously easy, all things considered. You just have to push the symbols on the statues like buttons in a certain order, and then the floor underneath you will reveal a secret path, allowing you to continue progressing through the game. Once the floor is opened and Nate's done a little bit of adventuring, he discovers he can push a concrete block that allows a stream of water to fill up the area below him. This allows him to swim to the other side and use some more red barrels to make a new path for Sully. Almost immediately after that, the pair run into a visibly unstable wooden bridge, and unfortunately, the only way forward is to cross it. Nate decides to cross it by himself at first, and this is where the game takes its time to introduce the Indiana Jones sections, as I like to call them. All jokes aside, I genuinely don't know what these sections are actually called, but they appear in almost every Uncharted game nonetheless, just in different scenarios. Essentially, the environment around Nathan Drake will start to collapse in some bizarre fashion that causes him to run towards the camera while the player has to continue calculating their jumps from platform to platform. The only reason I call these parts of the game Indiana Jones sections is because it reminds me of when Indy had to escape from that boulder. And that's probably where the developers got the idea from anyway. These types of sections are practically a staple when it comes to these kinds of games, and in Uncharted, they only get bigger and better as the franchise evolves. After barely surviving the bridge ordeal, Nate and Sully walk into a room with a huge indent in the center of it, and based on the carvings on the wall and the markings on the floor, the two quickly realize that a large golden statue of some kind used to rest here. This is also where things start to click for Nate, as he begins to connect the dots, piecing things together, realizing that there never really was a city of gold like he heard in the legends. Instead, it was a golden idol. Sully also makes a notable observation that has a little bit of foreshadowing to it as well.
Look here, these people, they're worshipping the damn thing. At least, I think they're people.
This will all make sense later in the game, but for now, the two must follow the trail that was presumably left by the Spanish settlers who tried to steal it. This leads them to a huge hole in the wall that was, again, presumably caused by the Spanish, but they actually end up discovering something completely different entirely. Somewhere in the middle of the rainforest, sitting atop a gorgeous waterfall that overlooks a magnificent ravine, are the remains of a German U-boat. These boats were mainly recognized for their ability to operate both above and under water, and due to this, Germany often used them to perform surprise attacks and other various naval missions in both world wars. The real question is, why are one of these things here in the Amazon rainforest? Even Sully points out that this
feels kinda hinky.
Hinky.
Meaning Nate has to check this one out for himself, but before he leaves, he makes sure to give Sir Francis's journal to Sully for safekeeping. This is also the part of the game where the levels themselves start to open up a little more and become far vaster in a sense. Uncharted may be a linear game, but that doesn't mean Naughty Dog wanted to compress Nathan Drake down to these small or condensed corridor-like levels like we've seen up until this point. As of yet, this is the first level that asks the player to scale something as big as a mountain, making you climb all the way up and around in order to reach the top of the submarine. Well, once Nate makes it inside, he finds a bunch of dead Germans with pockets full of Spanish gold. And believe it or not, that's not even the strangest thing about them. They all appear to have been clawed to death by some rabid animal of some kind. There's even blood and claw marks on most of the walls, too. And Nate doesn't ask that many questions, though, mainly because he notices the captain is holding a map of some kind, and upon further investigation, he quickly understands that the Germans were looking for El Dorado, too. Nate hastily tries to inform Sully about this discovery, but the radio cuts out halfway through their conversation. This alarms Nate enough for him to want to go check and make sure Sully is okay, and to make things even worse, on his way out of the U-boat, he accidentally arms a torpedo by knocking it over with a hatch-like door. After Nate escapes the U-boat, though, then he and the audience gets to meet the two main antagonists of Uncharted 1.
Hello.
Hey! Friends of yours, Sully?
I'm Gabriel Roman.
Yeah, I know who you are, asshole.
Manners, young man. This is just business.
Get over there. Easy.
Put your hands up.
Alright, they're up.
See, your friend owes me money, Mr. Drake. A lot of money. So when he told me that you two were onto something big, the find of a lifetime, he said, well, I was intrigued. But he's made grand promises before, haven't you, Victor? And here we are again. Another fool's errand.
Jeez, does he always go on like this?
Take it easy, Navarro. So, I'm afraid the time is up. Unless, of course, you found something in there, Mr. Drake, that might compensate for all this unpleasantness.
He's screwing with you, Nate. They heard everything. Just give him the map.
Slowly. What does a Kriegsmarine map have to do with El Dorado?
What, you think this is a coincidence? The Germans were after the same treasure. That map has something to do with it. So, we square?
For now. But just in case you need a reminder...
Hey, come on, leave him out of it.
Yeah, don't you guys usually just cut off a finger or something?
That's far too vulgar. No, I think this will hurt him a bit more.
Now, whoa. Come on, Roman. He's got nothing to do with...
Sully! Sully! Son of a bitch!
A lot of things get thrown at you right here, and if I had to guess, I'd say it was done in an attempt to confuse the player of the important plot point that is being set up here. For starters, you get introduced to Gabriel, Roman, and Navarro. Two treasure hunters that Nate and Sully are already somewhat familiar with based on in-game dialogue, but are totally unfamiliar to the players as of yet. And then, not even a minute later, Gabriel shoots Sully as Nate is wrestling for Navarro's gun, and then, immediately after that, the torpedo that Nate accidentally armed detonates and triggers all the other ones to detonate as well, resulting in an explosion big enough to knock everyone on the ground 10 times over, and Nate uses this ample opportunity to make his getaway. I was debating on whether or not I should use this time to analyze the main villains a little more thoroughly, but the game actually drip feeds most of the important information there is about them to the player as you continue to progress. This seemed kinda weird to me at first, but then I remembered how Naughty Dog said they were attempting to write a somewhat realistic story with Uncharted, meaning that not necessarily everything has to be spelled out to you before they actually happen. And I guess when you look at it that way, the only thing the player really needs to know right now is that these guys are looking for the same treasure as you, and they just shot your partner, meaning the best probable thing to do right now is to get out of Dodge as quick as possible. During Nate's escape, though, he runs into Elena again, who isn't necessarily the happiest to see him this time around. But Nate fills her in on what just happened, and then the two decide to make their way back to Elena's Jeep.
You always been this popular?
Well, I do seem to attract the scum of the earth. No offense.
None taken.
Do you have a good memory?
Yeah, why?
UK 2642. You got that?
Yeah, what is it?
It's Kriegsmarine coordinates. I think I know where the Spanish took El Dorado.
El Dorado?
The problem is, so that the bastards killed Sully. Damn it! If the Spanish found the treasure, they had to move it there, to that island. And Drake followed him.
Well, what are we waiting for? I'll get the story, and you get whatever it is you're after. Come on.
Hey, this isn't gonna be a vacation, you know.
I can take care of myself. Besides, you owe me one.
I suppose I do.
We're on the trail of the lost treasure of El Dorado, and it's brought us here to this tiny island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean.
Let's get a closer look. I hope we're the first ones here.
Will we discover the ruins of a forgotten colony and a fortune in Spanish gold? Or does the island have darker secrets in store for us?
That should keep him from changing the channel. Whoa! What the hell was that?
An anti-aircraft fire? This is so not cool!
Oh crap! We're on fire!
Enough with the damn camera! We gotta bail out!
Bail out? Does this thing even have parachutes?
Now would be a good time to look!
I hope these things still work.
We'll find out in a second.
Have you ever done this before?
Of course! You just jump, count to 5, and pull the cord. Now go!
Are you coming?
Kind of busy right now. Get going!
See you on the ground?
Right behind you!
Yeah. Okay.
What am I doing? Okay, you just jump, count to 5, and pull the cord. How hard could that be? Oh, crap! Everything behind me! Shit. Whew. Hell.
next chapter starts with Nate waking up with his parachute miraculously caught in a tree, but he has no idea where Elena is, and to make things even better, he left the map of this island on the plane that just got shot down, meaning he now has to navigate his way through this gloomy, uncharted island completely alone. There's even this funny moment where you actually regain control of him, and he starts listing off every inconvenience he just experienced.
Strangers trying to kill me, leave my map on a burning plane. Plane is missing, most likely dead. That's great. It's a great start, Nate.
As you continue to advance through the level, you'll encounter a few waves of enemies here and there, and I guess now is as good a time as any to talk about the many poses of Nathan Drake. I know this might come off as random, but with the main pillars of gameplay for Uncharted being platforming, puzzle solving, and cover-based gunplay, it means that the developers actually had to spend a lot more time than you'd think modeling how Drake would look while he's taking cover. And this is proven by some of the early concept art that was pitched for Uncharted. It's nothing major or is it any kind of game-changing knowledge to know, but it's still nice to know that this much thought and effort was put into the littlest and simplest things as taking cover, especially since it's one of the only things the player is going to be doing 100% of the time until the end of the game. This chapter also introduces adaptive environments, which is basically just a fancy video game term or mumbo-jumbo for saying the level will evolve as you progress through it. For example, this rock starts to break, causing the player to need to jump in order to avoid a death screen, and just as they do, a mounted gun truck shows up. Then players can shoot the barrel in the back that conveniently turns said truck into a new bridge, allowing them to continue forward. I've often seen a lot of people online criticize the Uncharted games for moments like this, calling them things like set piece the game, but I really don't think moments like these are as bad of a thing as people make them out to be. I mean, you cannot sit here and try to tell me that what just happened wasn't cool or visually appealing in at least one way. Plus, I know I overanalyzed it a little bit and drug it out for the video, but everything that I just stated happens in a matter of like 10 seconds, further increasing the reward or payoff experienced by the player. Eventually, Nate discovers the wreckage of his plane, and this is where the soundtrack truly begins to work its magic. So much so that it's so easy to just get lost in.
Oh man.
Amy Hennig went on record to say that since Uncharted was designed to be more of a contextual adventure instead of a period historical adventure, the music team thought that a classical or a traditional approach to the soundtrack with big orchestras would end up sounding out of sync in the long run. So, Greg Edisman was sought out by Naughty Dog in order to write the soundtrack for Uncharted, mainly because Amy Hennig really liked his unique ability to use unexpected instruments in ways that kind of supported the story as it unfolded. Which is exactly what happened in that clip I just played of Nate finding the plane. Not much else really happens in Chapter 4 narratively, but Nate does end up finding that map inside of his crashed plane, and he also spots Elena's parachute in a nearby abandoned but not quite unoccupied fortress. Chapter 5 is actually one of my favorite chapters in the entire game, just because of its willingness to divert the player's expectations. There's even a few times where Nate echoes this same sentiment back to the player at specific moments. For example, Nate has to scale the side of this massive fortress, and as soon as he makes his way in, he immediately has to go right back out and find another way in. Naughty Dog realized how most players would probably feel about this, so they made Nate relate to them by reacting in the same way that they probably did.
Oh, you can't be serious.
Another notable part of this level is the clever camera work. I know I said the game was beginning to open up back in Chapter 3, but this is where the game really opens up. Well, as much as a linear action-adventure game in 2007 can, anyway. The camera even pans in and out as you continue to scale the fortress. And I'm no Einstein, but I'm pretty sure that's supposed to help signal back to the player how ridiculously monumental this structure actually is. Yeah, if you wanted to be a smartass, you could say the camera followed you as you made your way around the corner of that mountain back at the U-boat. But this is truly the first time where the camera itself moves on its own sporadically, constantly shifting from position to position as the player continues to progress up, down, and around this massive limestone fortress. And I think Naughty Dog did this in an effort to help the player take in the whole environment that's around them, and I really like that. Sooner or later, though, Nate makes his way to Elena's parachute, but instead of finding her, he finds a zip line.
Elena, what the hell's she doing?
Hello?
Buka Pintu!
Siapa ini? Bicara sekarang.
Ah, crap. Sialano! Cepatan, buka pintu!
Ah, tai.
It worked!
There he is! Up there! Get on the gun!
Oh boy.
Of course, the important moment to note here is that Nate's seen Elena, but the thing that I wanted to point out and focus on is how the gate opened. I not only admire, but respect Naughty Dog's decision to allow some comedic value to be sprinkled throughout the game. This campy and pulpy style of comedy is something that Naughty Dog is already quite familiar with, just look back at some of their older games for further evidence, but I appreciate how Naughty Dog didn't just abandon their roots or shove it under the rug, so to speak, in an effort to tell a good action-adventure story, something they've never done before. The series starts to lean away from this kind of humor in the later titles, ditching these phrases and quips by replacing them with more fitting and humanistic reactions from Nathan Drake, but I still like how frequent they appear in the very first game. One of my favorite things about the Uncharted franchise is that you could actually use these games as a sort of benchmark to see Naughty Dog's journey into maturity as a development studio. So much so that I'd say these games actually fit pretty nice and evenly in the middle, as a sort of stepping stone or a staircase from Naughty Dog's development history from the early Crash Bandicoot games all the way to their eventual evolution into telling more attention-demanding narratives like The Last of Us. You could say whatever you'd like about Naughty Dog, their business practices, or complain about what they've done to these beloved franchises all you'd like, but one thing remains certain. The success and notoriety every new game they develop seems to gather is quite evident. The next chapter has some more level evolution and the game's very first QuickTime event. QuickTime events were almost a guarantee when it comes to 7th generation video games in the mid to late 2000s, so it's really no shocker that some ended up making their way into the Uncharted series. Eventually, though, you climb your way up and around this side wall here, and the level kind of wraps around itself and a new entrance is unlocked when Nate finds a spare set of keys. Nate also finds a clue left by some English colonists almost 100 years ago that were supposedly meant for Drake, leading Nate to follow them, and he eventually finds Elena in the process. But here's the catch. So do 2 other bad guys with grenade launchers. I actually went back and replayed this section a few times to see if anything different would happen, but it seems like no matter who you end up shooting, one always shoots the platform you're on, thus knocking Nate out and leading him to be kidnapped by the enemy in the process. Which also segues into the next chapter.
I know I'm not a big-time treasure hunter like you, but I doubt you're gonna find El Dorado in there. How'd you get yourself in this mess?
Trying to rescue you, as a matter of fact.
Oh, that's so sweet. Traditional sandstone, brick, and stucco. Limestone mortar, huh?
How'd you get to know so much about this?
My show, Episode 4, Architects of a New World. Yep. It'll just take a tug to pull these bars out.
What? No, wait, are you sure?
Get out of my way, puto! Tibatan, open this goddamn door!
Oh, crap.
Hey, Drake.
Eddie Raja. I should have guessed.
Fascinating document, huh? Seems like this Sir Francis was in my line of work.
Don't flatter yourself, Eddie.
Always ready to be enemies, eh? Tell you what, lead me to the gold, and I just might let you live.
Is that it? Is that my deal? Die now, or help you, and die later. Oh, it's a tough call, but you know what? I'll take die now.
Listen to me, maggot. I was promised treasure on this goddamn rock. And now, my men are dying. They can't even go outside to take a piss without an armed guard. And I have nothing to show for it! I am making you a fair offer. You help me find the treasure, and the last man alive gets the gold. And the girl, of course.
The girl? Oh, Eddie, the girl's long gone. She's probably off the island by now. Going for help.
Daikujin, you were never very good at poker. I will find her. Trust me. How much trouble could one girl be?
Well, come on!
Thank you.
Hey! Ah, damn it!
Okay,
Nice work.
thanks.
Hey, buka pintu!
Hang on.
After them!
Here, we get introduced to Eddie Raja. He and Nate obviously have some history of some kind, that much is implied by the dialogue, but the reason he's here now is because Eddie was hired by Roman and Navarro, mainly to function as some kind of muscle for this whole operation they've got going on. Eddie says something that Nate doesn't seem to catch on to, though.
And now, my men are dying. They can't even go outside to take a piss without an armed guard.
Meaning he's scared of what's on the actual island itself. And come to think about it, Eddie's men don't seem like the kind of people to be responsible for all these makeshift spike traps that seem to be appearing in Nate's way. Unfortunately, this conversation doesn't get to go any further though, as Elena breaks down the wall and then the first driving section plays out. One of these kinds of chapters are present in every mainline Uncharted game, and if I'm being completely honest, these are probably the most unrealistic parts of the games. Don't get me wrong, they do look cool, but they essentially consist of someone else driving Nate around while he absolutely destroys vehicle after vehicle. They start out simple enough with Nate manning a mounted machine gun, but eventually they do get pretty wacky. Eventually, the two run out of road though, both literally and metaphorically, causing Nate to reverse the Jeep into the watery pits of the sunken city that's below them. Which is, yet again, another seamless transition into the next chapter. Once the pair temporarily escape Eddie's forces, they find a jet ski, but before I even get started about those, Elena has something she wants to show Nate.
This was a big mistake.
No kidding. You know, I should have turned before the bridge.
That's very funny.
Oh, come here a minute. I want to show you something.
That thing still works?
Uh-huh. Check this out. Okay, see this building in the harbor? That's where all the boats coming into the colony would have unloaded their cargo. So if the El Dorado treasure came to this island, it would have had to have come through here.
Wait a minute, what? What was that?
What?
Rewind it.
Yeah?
Wait, stop.
Uh-huh.
Right there. That's our ticket out of here. Come on.
Our ticket out of here? Are you giving up?
Maybe you hadn't noticed, but we're kind of outnumbered.
We're doing fine so far. Oh, Lord.
Elena, I don't need your bullet-riddled corpse on my conscience. Let's go.
Oh, please. You quit if you want to, but don't use me as an excuse.
Fine. It's me, okay? I am quitting. Are you coming or not?
So that's it. You're just gonna forget about the treasure and forget about Drake?
God damn it, this is not worth dying over.
Okay. Okay. Listen, either way, we have to head back to the harbor. Don't worry about it. We can argue about it later. It'll be great.
Wait. This time, I drive.
Okay.
This is where Nate displays probably the most realistic reaction that anyone would have if they were put into a situation like this, and he and Elena debate about quitting. But no matter what Nate ends up choosing to do, they have to make their way over to the port, and to do that, they must use the infamous jet ski. These sections were most likely designed with good intent, I'm sure, and if we lived in a perfect world, this would have been executed flawlessly. But in reality, these parts of the levels kinda drag on a little too much for my own comfort personally, and I only say that based on how many times they get reused in some chapters. For example, Chapter 8 ends with you getting off the jet ski and you finally think, oh yes, it's over, and you also see a tower back in the distance. But the catch is, you just have to open a gate and continue using the jet ski in Chapter 9 to reach it. Chapter 9 is pretty mellow, all things considered. It's just a repeat of the same gameplay loop you're probably already familiar with, but eventually Nate will reach the top of the tower. And when he does, he finds yet another zip line that leads him coincidentally into a room that Elena can't open. Shooting the lock on the door, however, will let the two progress into the customs house, and into the next chapter as well.
Alright, let's find a way to the harbor and hope the boat's still there. These must be all the old ship manifests.
Oh.
Still seem to be in good shape.
Hey, check this out. This looks right. The Esperanza sailed from Callao, Peru, carrying 800 bars of gold, 1,200 silver emeralds, golden masks, ornaments.
Whoa, reading 16th century Spanish? Not just a grave robber after all, huh?
Right here. Gold statue. Weight, 20 arrobas. That's over 500 pounds. That's gotta be it.
Wow.
There you are.
That thing kind of gives me the creeps.
Huh. That's the last entry.
That somebody special?
What? Oh. Yeah. I guess you could say that.
Huh. I had you pegged as more of a woman in every port kind of guy.
Don't I wish? No, this was Francis Drake's ring. I, kind of inherited it.
Sic Parvis Magna?
Greatness from small beginnings. It was his motto. Check out the date.
29th of January, 1596.
One day after he supposedly died.
Wait, what are these numbers right here?
Coordinates. Right off the coast of Panama.
Oh, so that's how you found the coffin.
Yeah, that's right. See, Drake left this as a clue to pinpoint the exact burial site.
For someone clever enough to figure it out.
Yeah, nice try. But we're still going for that boat. Yeah, I'm afraid this is as close as we're getting to El Dorado.
This is the first time players get to see the statue of El Dorado itself, even if it is just a drawing that some Spaniard made over 100 years ago. All log entries also seem to miraculously disappear after this for some reason. Nate and Elena don't question that aspect of things though. Instead they end up talking about Francis Drake's ring that is on the necklace that Nate's wearing right now. Sic Parvis Magna is engraved into the side of the ring, as well as some coordinates that led Nate to that coffin he found at the beginning of Chapter 1. But when the phrase is translated from Latin to English, it translates to greatness from small beginnings. This, too, is another idiomatic expression that is meant to resonate and both symbolize Naughty Dog and Nathan Drake together in tandem. The saying itself is pretty self-explanatory, so I won't waste a whole paragraph talking about it here, especially since I already thoroughly did so in the first chapter. Plus, Nate and Elena have to reach that boat before it's too late. The game then throws another chaotic QuickTime event at you, but before you even know it, the next chapter starts as a helicopter flies overhead, only noticeable thanks to a conveniently placed hole in the roof.
Wait, that's not one of Eddie's.
The 11th chapter is the official halfway point of the game, and it's also where the narrative is about to take a sharp turn.
Get this all on the boat now.
How did did you get here?
You really need to see this.
Now is really not the best time.
No, Nate.
What are you doing?
You really need to watch this. Just...
What?
Don't forget to stop on the dock.
And... Hello. He's alive.
Huh.
I don't know, Nate. I mean... How much do you trust this guy? It's not exactly like they're holding him at gunpoint.
I know.
We got to get the hell out of here.
Yeah, it seems weird. But no, Sully's a lot of things, but he's not a backstabber. Which way were they headed?
Northish. Yeah, towards the mountains.
Okay, it's gotta be the monastery. Let's go.
What if it turns out he's working with them?
We either rescue him, or we beat the crap out of him. Hell, I might just beat the crap out of him anyway.
Somehow, Sully is seen to be alive and well here, even though Nate clearly seen him get shot right in front of him. This evidence alone is enough for Nate to ditch his whole idea of fleeing the island in order to try to rescue Sully, or at the very least, question him enough to find out what's really going on here. Nate and Sully have a very strong relationship, and it's not like him to just backstab Nate like this. But the only thing they can do right now is to keep pushing forward, which is exactly what the pair decide to do until they come across an old decrepit wooden bridge.
How does something like this happen?
See those scorch marks?
Uh-huh.
Somebody packed this place with enough gunpowder to blow it wide open. Ooh. Watch where you step. Some of these boards are really falling. Elena! I can't hold on! Give me your other hand! You've got to let it go!
Damn it! Oh, shit!
It's okay. Come on. Come on.
Unfortunately, Elena's camera doesn't end up making it across the bridge, and just like that, all footage and evidence of El Dorado even existing is gone in an instant. Chapter 12 starts with Nate and Elena continuing to track down that boat they just missed, and to do that, you guessed it, they have to reuse the jet ski once again. The decision to put a jet ski section here right after two critical plot points were just unearthed, those being Sully's alive and Elena losing her camera, not only sucks to play through, but it really does slow down the story a whole lot more than the developers were probably intending. This time around, Elena is equipped with a pistol instead of a grenade launcher, and although that does make aiming a little easier, the downside to that though is that enemies are no longer one-shot due to the less damage being dealt. The red barrels of this chapter also float towards you instead of remaining stationary like before due to the fact that you're heading upstream now. There was also this moment where I distinctly remember asking myself, and now who the hell is even throwing these red barrels into the river like Donkey Kong anyway? And to my surprise, you actually catch the guy red-handed near the end of the level in a pretty comical manner. Apart from that though, this chapter isn't very noteworthy. The next chapter is where the environment itself starts to change, at least a little bit anyway. You're still on the same island as before that's off the coast of South America, but now the weather has shifted slightly and the time has changed, giving the surrounding areas a darker tone and a more desolate vibe to them. The choice to make the foliage no longer appear as vibrant or vivacious as it once was alone is enough to instill a special kind of uncertainty in the player and make them feel anxious or uneasy as they make their way through this thicker part of the rainforest. And the player is right to be a little weary here. There's a unique part of this chapter that I liked where Elena eagerly runs past Nate as the two of you are climbing a set of stairs, and I'll just let that scene play out on its own.
Slow down. One of many goons could be up ahead.
Come on, we left those clowns in the dust ages ago. Oh my god! That's disgusting. Oh, Wish I had my camera. So what? The Spanish booby-trapped the island to protect their gold?
This wasn't made by the Spanish. Take a closer look at the spikes.
You have got to be kidding me.
This is from our plane.
Wait, that doesn't make any sense, though. Why would someone set traps like this when their own men are crawling all over the island?
They wouldn't. Something's been here since the trap was sprung.
Something or someone? Do you think
Shh. Do you hear that?
Hear what?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. We're being watched.
Watched?
Yeah, you know what? It's probably nothing. Let's just get out of here before we run into whatever's been chewing on this guy.
Okay.
I really enjoy the choice to introduce a sort of sense of paranoia here because it feels like just the right amount of narrative weight to keep the player on their toes as they continue to look for Sully and the treasure. I can't lie though, the realism and the tone that the plot was carrying up until this point definitely gets sacrificed here a little bit as the needle shifts slowly and surely to a more fantasy-esque realm of telling things. But it also adds a new horror element to the narrative that, because of how the game has chosen time and time again to sort of ground itself in a realm of reality, it kinda just works. So, when Nate discovers a footprint in the mud that doesn't appear to be quite human next to a makeshift trap that was made out of the plane they recently crashed, it instills a very unusual kind of feeling inside the player. One of uncertainty, dubiety, and perhaps it even makes them give a little speculation into the supernatural. After walking around for a little longer, you'll come across two guards that mention something about Sully being held up in the old library that's nearby. So that's exactly where Nate and Elena head to next, but things don't go exactly according to plan and the two get spotted in the process. Once this room of enemies is cleared out though, the question the player has probably been asking themselves in the back of their head for most of the game is finally answered.
Man, it's about time you showed up.
Well, you're looking awfully good for a corpse.
So you brought the girl after all, huh?
The girl?
Hey, if it wasn't for her, you wouldn't be getting rescued right now.
If this is a rescue.
What the hell does that mean?
You gotta admit, Sully, this all looks a little shady.
Yeah.
I mean, you tipping those guys off?
And miraculously showing up alive?
Now wait a goddamn minute. Roman had a contract out on me. I needed to buy some time. All right, stupid mistake. I didn't realize they'd try and track us.
Sully, we would have been headed home with the treasure by now if you had just for once kept your mouth shut.
And you might have thought of checking for a pulse before running off and leaving me for dead. Look, none of that matters now.
All right, so how is it you're standing here breathing and all, huh?
You are not gonna believe this. Huh?
No way. Old Francis took a bullet for you.
Yeah.
I thought this kind of thing only happened in the movies.
Yeah, well, it still hurt like a son of a bitch, I'll tell you that.
I bet.
Anyway, once they realized I wasn't dead, I convinced Roman that they would never find the treasure without me. So I've been trying to mislead him ever since, waiting for you to show up.
Well, where are they now?
Well, they're chasing a little red herring I sent him on the other side of the monastery to get rid of him. Look, Drake had it all figured out. See, that's the symbol the Spanish used to mark their secret vaults. The treasure is hidden right here in this monastery. Find the symbol,
and we find the vault.
We have everything we need right here. All the clues to take us right to the treasure. We can do this, kid.
All right, you boys aren't gonna get all chummy and leave the girl behind again, are you?
Don't even think about it, Sully. She's got a mean right hook.
I'll keep that in mind.
Even though this type of resolution kind of shares some resemblance with other cliches in movies, and Nate even echoes this back to the audience, sort of.
I thought this kind of thing only happened in the movies.
And I feel like this is Naughty Dog low-key or subconsciously trying to break the fourth wall and tell the player, yeah, we know that's kind of a silly answer, but just roll with it, will ya? And for that reason alone, I'll allow it. It honestly kind of helps Uncharted feel more like that short, playable B-list movie even more, and that's kinda what these games were designed to be if you really think about it. That's also why you could get away with casting actors like Mark Wahlberg and Tom Holland to fit these kind of roles, because the real action of Uncharted is woven into the actual narrative itself, and more often than not showcased through the environments around the characters. Plus, the decision to kill off one of the main characters only to bring them back hours later is a really bold move in itself, and one that can't just be executed with reckless ambition. That's why the game coordinated so many things to happen at once, because something like this can only happen if the player is truly confused. And to everyone's surprise, they actually managed to pull this same shit off again in the third title. Except in that game it's arguably more thought out and fits the overall narrative a bit more, but I'm getting ahead of myself. This is also the moment that the game has been building up to for the last few chapters, and it's the first time these three protagonists have been seen on screen together since Chapter 1. Now that the gang's all back together, the only thing left to do now is find the treasure before the opposition. After Nate solves this puzzle by making these 4 statues face a specific direction, a secret door opens up that looks like it's ripped right out of a Scooby-Doo cartoon, and this is also where the gang find the secret vault. This secret passage leads into a church that has yet another secret passage in it, if you could believe that. The second one, though, is tied to a puzzle that can be solved by ringing these 2 large bells on opposite sides of the room from each other at the same time. After continuing to progress through the level enough, Nate will eventually stumble into a room that is directly adjacent to one with all of the main antagonists in it so far, and Nate gets to do a little eavesdropping on their meeting.
This is completely unacceptable.
What do you expect from me, Roman? My men are getting massacred!
I find it hard to believe that one man could wipe out your entire crew.
Ugh, it's not just Drake, goddammit! I'm telling you, this island is cursed!
Enough. Take your sorry mob and go.
Wait, you can't cut me loose. You owe me a share of the gold!
Your share, Eddie, was contingent upon you doing what I required. You assured me that Drake was captured and the island secure.
Oh, this is bullshit, Roman, and you know it!
We are done here, Mr. Roger.
Dai camo! Mattia Giallo! Cielan!
Remind me again why you employed that superstitious idiot?
You wanted someone cheap.
Well, you get what you pay for, I suppose. And what about you, Navarro? Are you worth what I'm paying you?
The vault's here. I'm sure of it. If Sullivan can be trusted...
Which he can't.
Look, he knows we'll kill him if he's lying.
Don't be stupid. He knows we'll kill him once we find the treasure. He has no incentive to tell the truth. Really, Navarro, sometimes I think you left your brains back in that slum where I found you.
I just need a little more time.
Chasing this treasure of yours is proving to be more trouble than it's probably worth.
I assure you, El Dorado is worth more than you can possibly imagine.
It had better be.
Here, the hint towards there being some kind of preternatural beings on the island gets thrown back at the player again, but more importantly, we get more info on Navarro and Gabriel Roman's relationship, if you can even call it that, really. When Roman says,
"Sometimes I think you left your brains back in that slum where I found you,"
it's supposed to be implied that Roman kind of did the same thing Sully did for Nate all those years ago, except Roman didn't perform this act of charity out of love or passion like Sully did. Instead, he seen Navarro as a business opportunity. One that he would and could just as easily get rid of if that opportunity doesn't come to fruition in the exact way that he wants it to. In a way, this makes these two a sort of bizarro version of Nathan and Sully. They're all treasure hunters at the end of the day, but their morals and personal beliefs couldn't be any more different, and that also goes to help sell them as believable villains in my opinion too. Hell, it's never even really outright stated that these two are villains necessarily. Sure, they've both committed countless acts of violence and probably don't have the greatest intentions, but does that mean Nathan Drake does? Later, the franchise even chooses to ask this same question of if Nate is really a good guy or bad guy or not, a topic they explore with great detail, I might add, but things are kind of different here in Uncharted 1. In the first game, things are a whole lot more simpler, and the narrative is mainly focused around the race to find the treasure itself, more so than it is the philosophy of treasure hunting or anything like that. But at the same time, if you look deep enough, philosophy is certainly something you can find. For example, if you analyze the root of the race, you quickly figure out the reason everyone was participating in it is for their own selfish reasons. Elena wanted to use the treasure for her show, Sully wanted to use it as a way of paying off his old debts, and for Nate, well, this is something Nate has been wanting to do ever since he was a kid, but that reason also doesn't get explored until the later games. Roman and Navarro are just the other side of what Nate and Sully could have ended up becoming if they lost themselves in this line of work, and I think that's why I enjoy them so much as antagonists. Plus, no other Uncharted villain is quite like them either. The ones in the following Uncharted games seem to have been designed in ways to more so question Nathan Drake's philosophy, ideology, and even his morals to an extent, and that's not even necessarily a bad thing. But here, things are way more raw and simplified, and that lets the story be more digestible and easy to follow in the process. The next chapter starts when you make your way back to the surface, and after advancing through enough of the level, Sully will radio to Nate and inform him of another secret entrance that seems to have opened inside the church, and this one leads him to a vantage point that overlooks the treasure vault. Once the coast is clear, the trio regroup, and another puzzle needs to be solved in order to open the second door to the secret vault. One that tasks Nate/the player of rotating a few symbols on the wall in the right order.
Looks like we're in business.
Yeah.
Heads up.
What do you make of it?
I don't know. Could be a dead end.
Wait. It looks like there might be a passage this way. Uh-oh.
Oh, shit.
What the hell's that?
Sully, get out of there.
Huh?
It's a trap! Sullivan, are you okay? Sully!
Yeah, fine. Still in one piece. You knocked me on my ass, though.
Yeah, well, you better get back to the library. We're gonna have to find another way out of here.
The treasure vault always stuck out to me for several reasons, but one of the main ones is because of how this enormous labyrinth that is completely underground has somehow remained untouched by the rest of the world for decades, if not centuries. Another reason is for its unique level structure. In this chapter, there are tons of symbols placed on the ground, and the player must follow the right one down the correct path in order to continue progressing. And when they do, the game also decides to throw a new kind of moving obstacle into the equation. These things are an instant death if they manage to knock you off the platform, but they also do something that's rather clever, and that's turn the basic climbing and exploring sections into puzzles themselves in a way. For example, the player has to be somewhat careful when they cross paths with these death traps because of how they restrict and block off certain areas that are normally climbable otherwise. There's also a QuickTime event that plays when Nate steps onto a wooden platform that I thought was pretty unique, and not necessarily the event itself, but rather the intention behind it. Watching Nate fall and then immediately catch himself in some insane way that the average Joe would never have the kind of reaction time required to successfully orchestrate is one of my favorite things about the Uncharted franchise. And the stunts that Nate manages to pull off only get more miraculous and astonishing with every new entry into the franchise. But you could clearly see that these kinds of moments have always been a sort of thought in the back of Naughty Dog's head, even as far back as the first game. Eventually, the two run into Eddie Raja again, who is still looking for the treasure despite his falling out with Roman. He ends up sicking his men on Nate and Elena, which causes them to try to find a new way out, but they end up finding a room with no exit instead.
There's nothing here.
This is getting so old.
Nate?
It's Drake. He never found it. He just died here. So much for greatness. Wasted his life. For nothing.
Nate, are you ready to get moving?
Yeah. More than ever.
When Nate finds the body of Sir Francis Drake in this random tomb, I feel like it's trying to symbolize the act of Nate looking back at himself in a way. He can't believe that Drake spent all these years and left all these clues just to come up empty-handed. And even worse, you could even make the argument that he died because of this treasure. After witnessing it, Nate is left speechless, and this is when he clutches his necklace, the sole item that he's let dictate his every motive for as long as he can remember. And he just lets it go, giving it back to Sir Francis as a way of saying he's no longer going to continue down this same path as everyone else who's hunted for El Dorado. This moment of clarity gets put to rest pretty quickly though, as eventually Eddie and one of his goons will show up in a clear sense of panic.
Hello, boys. Easy, Eddie, easy. What the hell's going on out there?
Didn't you see them?
Oh, no. Oh, God, no.
We're trapped.
Jesus, what is that?
We're dead. We're all dead. No!
Eddie, get back here! Oh, crap.
Drake, if we don't make it out of here, I just want you to know, I hate your guts.
Yeah, likewise, pal. Now let's do this.
Now, descendants are finally revealed to the player in spectacular fashion. The descendants are mutated, zombie-like creatures that serve as one of the game's biggest twists. They are the result of the curse of El Dorado, which transforms humans into feral, inhuman kind of beings. These creatures were once Spanish conquistadors and later members of a Nazi expedition, all of whom were exposed to the deadly effects of the El Dorado sarcophagus. This is also where the game throws all sense of realism out the window in hopes of adding a supernatural element to things, and for what it's worth, Uncharted still does a fairly reasonable job of operating within the confines of reality even after these monsters are introduced. Of course, there's not really much you could do or say to justify it 100% of the way through, but if you're going to criticize these games, you also have to remember that they were inspired by movies like Indiana Jones. A universe where crystal skulls and the Ark of the Covenant are feasible objects one can realistically obtain with enough effort. If you look at it from that lens, then I think it makes perfect sense as to why some kind of narrative element like this was even able to make its way into Uncharted. Plus, I have to admit, it makes for a damn good time gameplay-wise shooting these little fuckers while you run down a long hallway. I remember playing this part of the game whenever I was a kid, and I was absolutely shocked when these little bastards first shown up, because they don't behave like the normal goons you've been facing all the way up until this point. They move more akin to zombies, or zombies mixed with some kind of rabid monkey, making it really hard to actually land a hit on one of these guys. And to top it all off, the game has been building up to this moment ever since the second chapter. They're the ones that were seen on the wall worshipping the statue, they're the ones that have been setting all those traps around the islands, and they're responsible for those odd-shaped footprints you found in the rain if you couldn't tell. Making the climax of this little sub-story 100 times better. Everything happens so quick, too. Eddie's guard gets taken out almost instantly, and it doesn't take very much longer before Eddie does too. For what it's worth, Nate even tries to save him, but there are just way too many monsters for that to happen. And now he's got to face them all alone. Sooner or later, though, Elena lets down a rope for Nate, allowing him to climb up, and then a chase sequence unfolds where the pair run into another secret room, except this time it was formerly occupied by the Germans.
What the hell were those things?
I don't know. Are you okay?
Yeah. Nate?
Okay. I don't think they can get through this.
Nate,
What?
where are we?
I'm not sure. Go! Wow. This explains the U-boat in the Amazon.
Nate, come here, look at this.
So they found it. They must have broken into the vault and cleared it out.
Yeah, but what's a monastery got to do with it?
I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. If that's where the statue is now... Oh man, we were right on top of it.
I bet this will take us to the surface.
Guess the Nazis didn't pay their electric bill.
Oh, damn it!
You know, I bet if we can make it to the generator room, we could get the power turned back on. We just gotta find a way out of here first. Wait, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Found a way out.
Nice work.
Yeah.
All right, let's go.
Nope. This one's all you, cowboy.
What do you mean?
Nate, you know I can't make that jump.
There's no way I'm leaving you here alone with those things.
We don't have a choice. Just go turn the power on, come back and get me, and then we'll get the hell out of here, okay? Just go.
I will be right back.
Yeah.
Here is where it gets revealed to the player that Sir Francis Drake wasn't the only one after the treasure, but you probably could have guessed as much based on that U-boat you found back at the waterfall. Apparently the Germans, more specifically the Nazis, were also after the secret of El Dorado, and they came pretty close to taking it home from the looks of it. They even went as far as to set up a whole base of operations that is totally hidden inside the enclave of this mountain. The level itself actually starts out by making you climb across these old, decrepit, or rusty-looking pipes while the environment just hangs out in the background, looking as scenic and rustic as ever. The camera even remains stagnant as you climb over these large objects and clear these vast spaces, and it looks utterly magnificent the whole time. Like when you shimmy over the second U-boat, for instance. You don't actually get to explore the inside of this one, but because you've already been inside of one of these things, you know how large they really are. It's almost like the intent here was to instill a sort of sense of dread inside the player by saying something like, "Hey, remember how big these boats are? Well, now they look really tiny. That must mean you're up pretty high, man. Good luck," they say as they chuckle and sarcastically pat you on the back while you're dangerously close to that edge. There's even another part of this same chapter that uses another stationary camera placement that I really liked. Almost immediately after the U-boat, Nate has to jump across this old staircase that isn't there anymore to continue forward, and normally I wouldn't even point this out, but here the camera is behaving a lot differently, and instead of being more freeform, it's focusing on specific angles that are more common among horror films. And although this does sound random, this is a very deliberate and intended choice by the developers. You see, Chapter 18 is where the game's tone starts to focus on horror more than it ever has before, and it also contains what quite possibly may be the best jump scare I've ever seen in a 7th generation video game that wasn't of the horror variety. As Nate slowly makes his way to the generator room and explores the remains of this abandoned facility, he and the player are probably wondering what happened in all of these creepy rooms and why are there so many guns and dead bodies scattered around them as well. And most likely, while Nate and the player are busy pondering on this, a descendant is programmed to jump around the corner and probably scares the player 9 times out of 10.
Oh, shit.
This entire chapter has been trying its hardest to scare the player, doing everything from trying to prey on their fear of heights, all the way to putting them into some pretty dark corridors. That much is very clear. And the next one is going to turn things up a notch. Once you start to activate the generator, the sudden jolt in power results in an alarm bell to be triggered, and it also summons every single descendant to your active location. This part was pretty refreshing to play through because the elements of fright and dread were already there, but now by throwing danger in on top of it all, it's like being presented with the video game equivalent of an ice cream sundae. Eventually, though, Nate will attempt to run away, and when he does so, he stumbles into a room with a projector.
Is near. The devils hunt for me in the darkness. The gold of El Dorado bears a terrible curse. The Spaniards have unleashed hell, become as demons. My men have all been murdered, leaving the task to me alone. No ship will depart this island. I destroyed them all and drowned the cursed city. A thing of such great evil must never leave these shores. In my final hour, I commend my soul to God. May he have mercy on this unholy place. Francis Drake. My God.
Here, it gets revealed to the player that Drake actually did find the statue of El Dorado, and long story short, the statue itself is actually what caused all of these people to turn into these vicious and violent, bloodthirsty monsters that we see before us today. And to make things even worse, these hairless creatures catch up to Nate as soon as he gets done interacting with the projector, meaning the show isn't over yet. Once Nate manages to get away from them again, though, he then runs into Roman and Navarro, who now have the map that leads them directly to the treasure, and more importantly, they've captured Elena, and plan on holding her hostage until they've secured the treasure as a form of discouraging Nate from attempting anything crazy. I like how the plot kind of wraps around itself here, because not only does it draw you back into that original motive you have for being on the island, but it also gives the player a whole new reason to continue at the same time. Plus, this part of the story has a nice way of breeding these unique instances where you get to fight a weird mix of Roman and Navarro's men alongside the descendants at the same time. And it's a nice way to freshen up the combat experience without going too far and doing something like hindering the player mechanically. As soon as Nate makes it back to the surface, he radios to Sully as quick as he can, only to find out that he's being pinned down by some of Roman and Navarro's men. This whole chapter mainly consists of saving Sully and taking out enemies. A lot of enemies, if I may add. I'm almost positive this is where the largest number of enemies you've seen up until this point are thrown at you. I'm serious too, you have to go through like 10 whole minutes of a combat section that is scattered throughout both the church courtyard and the inside of the actual church as well. But you gotta show the player that they're into the endgame somehow, I guess. The main objective, though, is still to stop Roman and Navarro from getting their hands on the statue of El Dorado, and to do that they have to backtrack back underground. On their way down the passage, Nate tries to explain to Sully how El Dorado is cursed, but he's not having any of it. Before they get a real chance to discuss it, though, the two eventually catch up to the main antagonists.
Oh, man.
You two should realize by now that I plan for every contingency. Now drop your weapons. Down there. No heroics, please. Or I will kill her. Good. Now, if you'll just hang tight, we'll be with you in a moment. It's magnificent. The craftsmanship. I've never seen anything like it before.
That is only a shell. The real treasure of El Dorado lies inside. Open it!
My God.
Watch this. Adios, Jefe. So little imagination. Bajen la red! Bajen la red!
Navarro, that thing wiped out an entire colony. You don't know what you're doing.
Wrong. I'm the only person on this island who knows what the hell he's doing. Cargue la estatua. Cuidado! You are so pathetic. All of you, scrambling around for your petty treasures. Do you have any idea what this is worth? To the right buyer? Levántalo!
Oh no, what the hell is that?
God!
Jesus, what are those things?
It's the Spaniards, Sully. They never left. My God. If that thing gets off the island...
You gotta stop him. I'll cover you from here.
So, Navarro finally had enough. He tricked his mentor into becoming a zombie, and then he shot him dead where he stood. That's pretty damn cold, man, even for an antagonist. But then again, I also suppose the two didn't really have the greatest of relationships, so I can't really say that I blame the guy. Revenge was probably something that's been in the back of his mind for a long time now, based on how demeaning and degrading Gabriel treated him. After that, though, Navarro wastes no time taking over and moving the statue either, meaning Nate has to hurry if he wants to save the day. This is where the player regains control over Nate, and they have to hurry and run and jump onto the actual statue of El Dorado itself and hang onto it as Navarro tries to escape with it and Elena. There's also another death scene that is completely missable, where a descendant drags you under the water if you jump into that pool in the center of the room, just like the pirate did back in Chapter 1. And just like before, I thought this was goofy enough to add. Successfully jumping and hanging onto the actual statue, though, was beyond fun, and it leads the player into the final chapter. After the helicopter crashes, Nate is forced to fight his way through the cargo ship, taking Navarro's heavily armed men head-on in a desperate bid to save Elena. But this time, he's not just dealing with the mercenaries. Navarro himself is in constant pursuit, wielding a special shotgun with a laser sight that acts more like a scripted gimmick than a true weapon. The game also makes it clear to the player that you can't engage him directly. When the laser is overhead, stepping out of cover is an instant death, and trying to shoot him is pointless since he's effectively untouchable. Instead, the encounter plays out as a series of forced retreats. Navarro will essentially take cover behind a certain crate, and the only way to push him forward or flush him out is to take out the men around him or to effectively shoot the object shielding him, forcing him to reposition. This pattern repeats a few times until the chase eventually reaches the helipad, where the real fight begins, or at least what should be the real fight. At this point, Navarro loses his artificial invincibility, but rather than a tense, climactic showdown, the game instead pivots to a bare-knuckle brawl. Except even that too is stripped of player agency, since the fight is nothing more than a quick-time event. To put it mildly, it's a very anticlimactic resolution. Not just because the fight itself is mechanically shallow, but because it feels at odds with the gameplay pillars that defined the journey leading up to this point. After hours of engaging in these dynamic shootouts, being reduced to a series of button prompts disrobes this moment of the potential impact it could have had. And yet, despite its shortcomings, there's still a certain satisfaction in watching Navarro collapse, his arrogance finally, once and for all, undone by Player 1. It may not have been the most exhilarating final battle in gaming history, or even the final boss fight that this game deserved, but at the very least, it still offers players a decisive and conclusive ending to the story they've been invested in.
Elena! Elena! Oh, God. Elena! Come on. Can you stand? Okay, come on.
Okay.
You all right?
Oh, Nate!
Adios, asshole.
Quite a day.
Yeah, save the world, triumph over evil. Pretty typical.
Really?
It's a shame we're leaving empty-handed, though.
Oh, well, you know, I did manage to save one small thing. Here, I thought you might miss this.
Thanks.
Yeah.
You two got a funny idea of romantic.
Sully! Wow, you look like hell.
You should see the other guys. Got us a boat.
We already have a boat.
Yeah, big boat.
I like this one better.
Sully, you beautiful son of a bitch!
Borrowed it off a couple of pirates who were too dead to cash.
Sorry you didn't get your story.
That's all right. There'll be other stories. You still owe me one.
I'm good for it.
And that's how Uncharted ends. The legend of El Dorado and Navarro both get buried at the bottom of the sea. Nate and Elena share a beautiful moment together that gets interrupted by Sully. Then the cast rides off into the sunset. You couldn't ask for a better ending, honestly. I know this ending may be considered a little bit of a cliche. I mean, there's even a "you should have seen the other guy" bit sprinkled in on top of everything, but I don't necessarily think the ending is bad in any way, really. I mean, after a few hours of both action and adventure, you're damned right if you're thinking I at least want a happy ending for my troubles. If I'm being completely honest, Uncharted Drake's Fortune was the one game that definitively showed me that a compelling narrative it doesn't need to rival one of Lord of the Rings in scope, or does it need to follow the intricate structure of a Stephen King novel for it to still be engaging or thought-provoking. I realize now that some stories can still be enjoyable despite them not demanding airtight plotting or having a perfectly woven script. In fact, if you really wanted to pick apart the story, you wouldn't even have to look that hard. There are way more than a few plot points that resolve themselves in ways that can only be described as absurd, and yet none of that really diminishes the enjoyment I had in the slightest. For me, the Uncharted games have always excelled at blurring the line between cinematic storytelling and interactive gameplay. At its core, the loop is very simple. A cutscene sets the stage, followed by a sequence of exploration, puzzle solving, or combat, leading seamlessly into another cutscene that further drives the story forward. On paper, that may sound boring and formulaic, but in execution, I promise it's anything but. The game understands how to strike the perfect balance of momentum and player engagement, and I can't overstate how much I enjoy that shit, man. Hell, if I didn't, I wouldn't be sitting here making this video right now. Drake's Fortune was the first Uncharted game that I ever played, all the way back whenever I was just 9 years old, and even then, it was enough to hook me on the franchise for life. This wasn't just a game I enjoyed at the time, it was one that I loved so much that I went out of my way to buy merchandise for it over 10 years after I originally played it. Which is something I only do for the franchises I hold in the highest of regards, by the way. Uncharted earned that admiration, though, not through its perfection, but through sheer, undeniable charm. Uncharted Drake's Fortune stands as both an ambitious debut and an intriguing glimpse into what was, at the time of course, the future of cinematic storytelling in the genre of gaming. While it's true the game doesn't quite reach the narrative or gameplay heights of its sequels, it still delivers on an exciting, theatrical, action-adventure experience that certainly captivated players back when it originally released in 2007. Going on to sell over 2.6 million copies in the first 2 years alone, and that number later exceeding to 4.8 million nowadays due to things like bundles, sales, and remasters. Naughty Dog certainly took a bold step away from the whimsical platformers of their past, instead choosing to craft a modernized take on classic pulp adventures. One that blended historical intrigue, sharp-witted characters, and blockbuster set pieces in a way very few games had ever done before. The game undoubtedly proved there was a sort of hunger for this kind of narrative-driven action, and it cemented Nathan Drake as one of PlayStation's most recognizable protagonists in the process. Yet, if you look beyond all the commercial success, there's still something inherently compelling about the first adventure. The earnestness, the infectious energy that makes up for its shortcomings, the camaraderie between Drake, Sully, and Elena, the thrill of unearthing a lost legend, and the seamless fusion of exploration and spectacle, it all just kind of works, for lack of better words. And not only to mention, it laid the foundation for something far greater at the same time. It's nothing short of magical, honestly. The first Uncharted game is the kind of game that, despite its flaws, earns a special place in your heart because you can clearly see the potential bursting in almost every damn moment. And believe me whenever I say Naughty Dog saw it too. With their next entry, they would not only build upon Drake's Fortune, they would aim to shatter expectations entirely. Uncharted 2 Among Thieves was not just an evolution of the series, it was a turning point for the entire industry.
Neither do we. That's why we tracked you down.
Hey, what's going on everybody? If you've made it this far into the video, I just wanted to take a second out of my day to say thank you, seriously, from the bottom of my heart. Every video that I end up posting to this channel means a hell of a lot to me, and I feel like if I were to continue doing that without acknowledging your incredible patience, that would be very selfish of me. Every view, like, comment, or even subscription, it means the world to me, and I genuinely can't thank you enough, and I do see all of it, believe me. So much so that I've noticed the channel has started to gain a little bit of traction as of recent. Not any kind of notable traction or anything, but enough for me to decide to make a Patreon account. And before you bombard me in the comments section, hear me out. Making a Patreon is something that I've put off for the longest time now because I feel like it is something genuinely only established creators have the right to do. But whether or not I'm ready to categorize myself in that manner, some unfortunate events have recently occurred in my personal life that mean making a Patreon wouldn't necessarily be the worst thing that I could do right now. Especially considering a select few of you have decided to stick around and watch my videos, so like, why would I deny you the ability to support me further? But, like I said before, I also want it to be abundantly clear that it is completely optional and not required in any way. Every video that I've ever made or am going to make is still going to be uploaded to YouTube. A donation of any quantity will get your name at the end of the video or something to that nature, but that's really as far as it goes. I want the Patreon to be something that is completely optional and it doesn't take away from the main channel whatsoever. I still don't even really know how to work the website, so if I've done everything correctly, a link will be in the description, and if you do decide to donate, seriously, thank you. In case you're curious, all donations will be supporting me, my family, and my pets, my 2 cats. And with that being said, this is the actual end of the video now, for realsies. Normally I try really hard to write these kind of sentimental endings into my scripts, but I had to sell out this time, and for that I am really sorry, gang. But nevertheless, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Be careful.
Come on. I always am.
Ah! I did not see that! Ah!